Welcome back to the Lawyer Diaries. Today we are talking about retooling. Is it possible? We sometimes work with candidates who want to retool, some junior, but some more senior as well. Really, it's not uncommon for people to be either at the start of their career and realizing that maybe they didn't make the right choice, or even a few years down the line. I totally empathize with having to do something for a while to kind of figure out whether or not it's something you really want to do for the next 30 plus years. So that's what we're chatting about today.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that is really important to highlight is your seniority and when in your career you're thinking about retooling, because that will really impact whether you're going to be able to retool successfully. From our experience, the more junior you are, the more forgiving a retool can be. And the more senior you are, the less likely you're going to be able to retool successfully.
Yeah, there's going to be a number of challenges, which we'll discuss for any retool. But the biggest factors in our view that will either make or break your retool is are the market, your credentials, your practice group that you want to retool into, and what year you are.
hmm I would say, in terms of the market, back in 2021, when it was just a really, really hot market, retools were more possible. A lot of folks did them. I mean, mid-level litigators were able to retool into transactional work without a year cut. And that is really, really impressive. And that is definitely not the standard in a normal market, and absolutely not the case in a slow market. Typically, when you retool, you should realize like you will get a little bit of a haircut. If you're a second year corporate associate retooling into litigation, don't be shocked if you get cut into first year at that point. Or if you're a third year retooling, you might be made a second year. And I think that's something to consider. If you're not willing to take that haircut, you should consider whether or not retooling is really the right move for you. Typically, the people who are really committed to retooling don't mind a year haircut. Like it's so small in the scheme of transitioning into a practice that they can see themselves doing more happily for the next 30 years.
Yeah. And also, though, sometimes it's not just about the haircut. You might be like, oh, I'm fine being paid as a first year, even though I'm a third year. But that doesn't change the market. For example, this year has been really up and down in terms of hiring. It's overall been kind of slow. So when firms are not really going on hiring sprees and it's really an employer's market, and then like there's some firms now that are pushing back the start date for their incoming class, that means that they aren't going to want to take the risk, or maybe they don't have the capacity to bring someone on, regardless of whether you're willing to take the lowest salary possible. So sometimes it's not about you. It really is, the market and also what that specific firm needs. It's possible that they had, a corporate associate who decided they want to do lit last minute. So they need another corporate junior. And then, it's your lucky day. But that might not always be the case.
Right. And another thing that matters a lot when you're retooling are your credentials. They can matter more than the typical lateral move. And that's simply because, if you're at Cravath and you went to a top 5 law school, it will probably be easier for you to retool and go to a Vault 50 firm than it would be for someone else who's currently at, you know, an AmLaw 80 firm to retool. And that's just because you don't have relevant experience. So your credentials just matter a little bit more when retooling.
Yeah, absolutely, because they can't hire you based on what you've done because you're saying, "I don't wanna do this anymore."
Right.
So credentials definitely will give you a boost when you're making, this move at a pretty junior level. And I guess on that note, we were discussing earlier a bit about when is the right time to make a lateral move. Um, because, there's this accepted norm that whenever you start a new job, you stay for a year. But, you know, you also want to get too far into something that you don't want from the get. So, Erica, what do you think? ASAP is really the best call.
I think that if you are truly dedicated to retooling and you know that the practice that you're in right now isn't the right place for you, retooling sooner rather than later is really going to be beneficial. And that's simply because the more senior you get, the harder it is to retool because you're going to have to take a bigger year cut. People are going to wonder, well, why did it take you so long for you to realize you didn't like X practice? What are your thoughts on that, Becca?
So I guess I'm wondering, like, if someone hasn't even been at their firm a year, would we suggest that they move forward with a retool? I think this kind of blends into our next point, which is like, it depends on what's going on at your firm. So, and it depends on if you're doing like a partial retool or a full retool, i.e., if you're doing commercial lit and you want to do a different kind of lit, like antitrust or securities or entertainment, and your firm offers that versus like I'm in lit and I want to do corporate. I think if you are just a few months in at a firm, our advice would probably be to try to get some of that work at your current firm before you start applying to lateral. Do you agree?
Mm, absolutely. And to the extent you're able to get some of that work at your current firm at any point, you should do that because I think we talk to a lot of people who want to retool. And one thing that we always ask them and want them to consider is it that you really want to switch practice groups, or is the problem the current firm you're at? Or is the problem you're having a hard time adapting to big law culture and the demands of big law? Because sometimes it's really easy to confuse, oh, I don't like this practice, but it's actually the firm isn't the best fit for you, or you would enjoy this practice if you moved to a certain type of mid law firm. So I think get some of that work so that you know it really is the practice that's the problem.
Yeah, and it is a delicate balance, right? Because if you go to your work coordinator and you're like, I don't want to do lit anymore, I want to do corporate or bankruptcy or real estate, you kind of don't want that. If it turns out that that's not possible and there isn't room for you, let's say to fully retool at your firm, you don't really want them to know that you're unhappy. Um, exactly. I mean, I think obviously it's fair to vocalize, what kind of work you want, but like a full pivot might not be great to alert them to uh when you're like already in a practice group, if that makes sense.
Right, especially in a market like today's market where we're seeing layoffs happen, quite frequently. You don't want to signal that you have one foot out the door, um, if, whatever you are wanting to retool into is not possible at your current firm. I think one good way to get work in a certain practice group and see if that practice is a better fit for your personality and your strengths is to say something along the lines of, "Hey, I'm just curious. I'd like to be staffed on one or two matters or get an assignment, or get coffee with someone in that group and ask them
Yeah.
about what the day to day looks like, without, declaring that you absolutely want to be put into that practice group. Otherwise, you would not be happy at your current firm.
Totally. I think going through someone is also really great because if you're chatting with someone, you say like, "That sounds really interesting. I'd love to like help you out on one of those cases or whatever," and then you can get like a little bit of that experience. It might be easier than you think to try that at your current firm than just like jumping ship and going somewhere totally new.
Exactly, and I would say talk to someone. I mean, folks have so many folks have retooled. Try to find someone who has done that retool that you are thinking about and ask them, what do you wish you had known before you did the retool? And see if they truly are more fulfilled and happy post retool. And then also try to talk to someone who did the opposite retool. I mean, if you're trying to go from corporate to litigation, talk to someone who went from litigation to corporate to see what the differences are and whether they're happy with the choice that they made. I would say like information gathering is really, really important at this stage, and that's simply because as big law associates, you're not gonna, I mean, I'm sure it's been done, but I think one retool is certainly possible, but more than one starts to like people will start to raise their eyebrows. So if you're gonna retool, you really want to make sure that you get it correct that one time.
Yeah, and if you're in this situation, just know that we totally empathize with you. I think that especially for people who went straight through or maybe didn't have a clear idea of what their end goal was when they went to law school, you're kind of thrown into this and it's very nice over the summer. They're like, you can try everything you want. And then it's just a ton of fun, not a ton of work, and then 10 weeks pass and at some places, like, you have to decide basically what you're gonna come in as, and 10 weeks is nothing, right? Like, from 10 weeks, how can you extrapolate what you wanna do for decades to come? So, we totally understand that if you're having these feelings like, oh, I made the wrong choice, but other people are happy and, how did this happen? Like, it's actually more common than you think. And it's a really short time period that you have to decide if you don't have any other exposure.
Right. And I mean, I feel like it's even more challenging if, you were unfortunate enough to be one of the COVID summers. I was a COVID summer, so my summer program was only 6 weeks and it was fully remote. So I think it was even harder for folks to decide, is this the right practice for me? Should I be in a different practice? And I think in general, I loved law school, but it doesn't teach you what a practice is really going to look like. You're not going to know what it's like to be a corporate lawyer until you've actually done it. And typically, it can take 1 or 2 full years for you to see what it really looks like day to day. So we totally empathize. So many associates come to us and are contemplating a retool. And like Becca had said earlier, your chances also depend on the type of retool. If you're retooling from litigation to labor and employment or commercial litigation to labor and employment, that might be a lot easier than retooling from litigation to M&A and corporate practice. So like what you're hoping for and what your goals are will really influence how the chances of success.
Yeah. And this kind of bleeds into our last thought too, which is that you're going to have to have a demonstrated interest in whatever practice group you want to retool to. And, I was just thinking like there are some where it might be easier to show that than others, right? Especially if you're doing kind of like a partial retool versus a full retool. So if you're in commercial lit and you want to do more like data privacy work, well, you can go get your CIPP certification on the side. I'm not saying that's fun, but like that's a way to show your demonstrated interest and commitment and like keeping apprised of like evolving privacy laws so that when you're in an interview you can speak to your interest. Whereas if you are someone who in law school, your resume leans litigation heavy, you externed for a judge, you did litigation as a summer, now you're lit associate and you decide you want to do M&A, well, you're going to have to come up with a story because they're going to look at your resume and it's not going to be clear that that's really what you want to do.
Exactly. And that's where being able to get a little bit of that work at your current firm to the extent possible can be really helpful. And also, once you get to the interview stage for a retool, you really, really, really need to practice your responses to the questions that you're definitely going to get. One of them is, why didn't you retool at your current firm? And another one is, why are you interested in this practice? So having some sort of demonstrated interest can really help you with that second question. And you really are going to want to prep your responses because interviewing, they're going to grill you really hard on these tough questions.
Yeah. And it can be frustrating because, when you're in law school and then you're a summer, they really make it seem like you can do whatever you want to do. Like it's your choice. You can dabble in different practice areas. And then it's like you start practicing and you're locked in. And that's not your practice group. And it's unfortunate, but that's the reality of it. So I would just go in knowing that it's not the same as your summer, right? So when you're interviewing, you're gonna have to give good reasons, not just like, oh, well, I talked to one person and it sounds better than what I'm doing now.
Right. And I would say to those of you who are current summer associates or who will be summer associates next year, do your research and try to make the most out of your summer program. Obviously, have a ton of fun because summers are really fun. They're one of the best times as an associate in your legal career. But do your due diligence. Ask folks in corporate, what do they wish they had known ahead of time? And is there anything you should be aware of? And ask them the hard questions about, like what they don't like about the practice. Because your summer, oftentimes, not always, not every firm, but oftentimes it's the one chance where you get to move across different practices and then ultimately make up a decision about where you want to end up. So dabble in as many different practices as possible, even the small ones that you had never heard of, because maybe you'll absolutely love it. You'll love the people, you'll love the work, and that's what you want to do for the next 30 years. But be curious and ask hard questions, try to meet as many people as possible, and try to do as many different types of projects as possible in different practices.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. And like, I think I heard that when I was a summer, like, oh, ask people like, what they don't like. And it can be difficult to separate what people don't like about practicing at a big law firm versus like their actual practice. But like if you know that, just filter all the feedback like through that lens, if that makes sense, right? Um, I also wanted to say, like, I feel that maybe this has been a little bit gloom and doom, like retooling is impossible. It's not impossible. Erica did it. I know people have done it. And sometimes we even see roles that say like they're open to people who don't have experience in,
Yeah.
a specific thing or people who are retooling. So sometimes there are even posted opportunities that are open to associates who want to retool. So it really isn't impossible, but you should go into it with open eyes about the probability of it happening.
Absolutely. It is certainly possible. And for a lot of folks, it's the right move. Retooling was definitely the right move for me. I absolutely loved labor and employment practice, and I have absolutely no regrets. And it worked out for me. So I think if you go in with the right mindset, with the right expectations, you can definitely be successful. And I would say, like, the biggest thing is just having the right expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's all we have for today. If you have any questions, as usual, feel free to email us, comment. We'd love to hear from you guys. Till next time.
Bye.